Yeah, you warm my heart that we've had such a wonderful turnout tonight and that you're interested in this topic that is near and dear to me, emotional sobriety. But before I get into the presentation, I just want to share a little bit about my personal journey so you can have some sense about how I got here from where I came, right? So I'm a Vietnam vet. I went in the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old, and I went in as a solution to my teenage alcoholism. I thought the Marines would turn me into a man. I'd be able to outgrow that stuff. And right after by the way, I detoxed in boot camp. I wouldn't recommend that as a detox. I didn't know if I was shaking because the DI was yelling at me or because I was scared, probably both, right? So I volunteered for Vietnam when I was 18 years old, and I'm a combat Vietnam veteran. And when I went in the Marine Corps, like I said, I was a teenage alcoholic. In Vietnam, I started to experiment with drugs other than alcohol, and I became an addict. Came back from Vietnam in 1971. And through today, I think of it as synchronicity. Some might call it serendipity. I ended up being the third Marine that was being treated for their drug problem instead of kicking us out of the Corps. So I was stationed at the Kaneohe Marine Corps Air Station. What a great place to get clean and sober, huh? Oahu is a very special place for me, a very spiritual place for me. So being the third Marine, admit it, they really didn't know what they were doing. The Marine Corps just started this program. And so what they did, and it was really smart of them, they turned to the recovery community outside the Marine Corps Air Station in Kailua. And there just happened to be a group of young people who had found this way of life with a woman called Flowbird. And Flowbird was a real special gal. She was a 50-year-old hippie, right? She wore a bikini top, jean shorts, Birkenstocks, had her hair down, to her waist. And she had this gift with young people. And she had complete faith in God. Everywhere she would go, she would just say, God, tell me what you want me to do. And God would lead her around different places. Well, at this point in her life, it took her to Oahu. And she didn't have any place to stay. And when she got to Oahu, this fellow says, I've got a home on the North Shore. I'm going to remodel it in a year and a half. Why don't you just stay there for a while? And so she started this sober living for young people. She would wake up at 4 a.m. and she'd pray to God, ask God, what will you have me do today? And God would say, go here, go there. And everywhere she was sent, she'd find someone that needed help. Well, one of the people she found on the beach, and his story is in my latest book, was Tom McCall. And she brought her back to the house, and he found this way of life. Well, he was living in Kailua, and he was invited to come and share his story with us. So on Tuesday nights, we had a recovery rap session, not a drug rap session, but it was focused on recovery. So you got to picture this. There's 20 combat Marines standing around. We're in our combat fatigues. And this hippie walks in. He's got Birkenstocks on. He's got his, Bermuda shorts on, his Hawaiian print shirt. He's got his hair pulled back in a ponytail, and he's got wire rim glasses. And the energy was really weird. Tom even tells me today, I didn't know if I was going to get out of this place alive, the way you guys were looking at me. 5 minutes into his share with us, we were mesmerized. I was mesmerized. And what really touched me was what we would call in the program today, the language of the heart, right? He was talking to me about my experiences, even though he was sharing his. Now, what was so different about this, I had never in my whole life, not a long life, 19 years old, right? But I had never experienced anybody being that open and honest and authentic. The degree of personal freedom that he had was mind-blowing to me. The only time I felt that free in my life was when I was high or drunk. Then it didn't care who I was. But he had achieved that without being high or drunk. That woke something up inside of me. And it really touches me when I say it today. I couldn't have articulated this to you at the time, but I said, if I could find out how to achieve that in my life, I think I could find a way to make life work. If I could feel like that, if I could experience that kind of freedom, because that's what I was looking for. Everything I was doing, all the drugs I used was to find freedom. That's what I wanted. I wanted to find a way to be okay. Didn't know how to do it. Went up to him after the meeting. Said, Tom, how did you do that? And you heard this before. Stick close. I'll show you. And I did. And I did it 51 years ago. In the beginning of August, I met Tom. He is still my sponsor today. 51 years. He's got 54 years clean and sober today. 51 years ago. And he's been, I can't tell you what he means to me, right? When I just think about him, I want to cry. Because he helped me discover possibilities that I had no awareness of. See, that's how I want you to think about your recovery. Recovery is the discovery of new possibilities. And one of those possibilities we're going to talk about today is emotional sobriety. We're going to get into that. So here I am, back 1971, Vietnam vet, got a year left to serve. Got so excited about recovery, right? Going to meetings all the time, hitchhiking to the other side over the Poly Highway, going to Honolulu to hook up with Tom so we can go to a meeting in Waikiki. Fell in love with recovery. And now the program, right? 3 days old when I joined it, they didn't have any counselors. So I had like 60 days clean. I said, would you like to be a counselor? Hey, beats pushing a 105 howitzer around the base, right? No, but then the second thing that happened to me is I got really turned on to helping people. And I really saw that, my God, if I could find a career like this, it would be an avocation, not a vocation. And so I became a counselor, and I had a natural talent, even though I didn't know what the hell I was doing back then. None of us did, but yet people got well. And you know why they got well? Because we cared. Right? It was one addict talking to another addict and loving that person until they could love themselves. And that worked in an amazing way. But I saw that if I could learn more about how to help people, it would be incredible if I could bring more of myself to the therapeutic experience. So I decided to go back to school. Well, a pretty daunting proposal, given that I was a high school dropout. I dropped out of high school in the beginning of my sophomore year. I essentially didn't go to my freshman year. So I had no high school experience. So what do you do if you're going to go back to school? Well, you have to take your first class. And I did. And it was oceanography. And oceanography, Hawaii is the place to take oceanography, right? Because, we're going out. I'm going to the Navy base where they're training dolphins to carry tools down to submarines that need to be. I mean, it was an amazing experience. But what I discovered, remember I said recovery is discovering new possibilities. I wasn't as stupid as I thought I was. That if I actually read the homework and read the assignments in the textbook, I could answer the questions on the text, that I had to take. And so now that's the third thing that happens. I get turned on to recovery, turned on to helping people, and turned on to school. And that started my journey. 1987, 16 years later, I graduated with a PhD in clinical psychology from the University of California, Davis. Unbelievable, unbelievable experience I had. Through this whole time, whenever I had a chance to write a paper, give a presentation, I would integrate it with my recovery experience because I was very interested in what is happening to us here, right? What's this magic about that we're experiencing? And I wanted to understand that, right? I wanted to understand what are the elements that go into creating change in people's lives. So throughout my career, I was integrating my recovery with what I was learning psychologically and spiritually. And so that's what I'm going to share with you today. Some of the things that I've learned along the way. Now, I'll try to get this in an hour. I could probably talk to you for the next several days, right? And not cover the same material because it's once I've opened up this whole area of emotional sobriety, I discovered that it's an incredible treasure chest that has been literally untapped in the recovery field. I was sharing with Freddie when we talked on the phone the other day that my God, it was about 20 years ago or so. I was reading the 12 and 12, and at the end of the first paragraph, I think, or a second paragraph, Bill says this statement. Well, if we practice these principles in our daily affairs, that we and those about us begin to discover, he says, emotional sobriety. So it hit me first our physical sobriety and then our emotional sobriety. I had never heard anybody say that in a meeting. No one ever explicitly stated that the goal of our recovery is to develop this emotional sobriety. Now, we're going to talk about what that is, but a real simple answer is to grow up, right? To grow up is to start to learn how to cope with life as life is, not as we think it should be, not as we think it's supposed to be, but to cope with life as it is. And you're going to see today, that sounds simple, but it's not that easy to do. Not that easy to do. But before we get into this, I want to put it in the context of this whole thing that you guys are experiencing here on Recovery Capital, right? So let's talk about what Recovery Capital is and how come you are not listening to me. Well, let me get out of this. No, it froze up again. I'm going to have to power this down and turn it back on. Unless you can.
Let's see if we can stop sharing first and see what happens from there. Is there
Yeah, that's what happened before. It froze up for some reason. You know what? Let me try to unhook it from the TV for a minute. Let's see if that does that.
I think that it's not. It's the laptop. It's not the TV. I don't think.
Is the laptop frozen? No. All right, let's try that again.
Go back to. Yeah, look at those guys.
Who are those two guys?
Those guys look pretty good.
Where'd they come from? All right, let's see if this works. Yeah, we did it. Thank you, Freddie. Well, let's start with a definition of recovery. Right, William White, if you haven't read any of William White's work, it's called the White Papers, and he's a prolific writer. He wrote a wonderful book called Slaying the Dragon about treatment in the United States. He's just very, very thoughtful about recovery. And this is what he says. He says recovery is an experience. He calls it a process and a sustained status through which individuals, family members, and communities impacted by severe alcohol and other drug problems utilize internal and external resources. Pay attention to that, internal and external resources, to voluntarily resolve these problems, heal the wounds inflicted by the alcohol and other drug-related problems, and actively, not passively, but actively manage their continued vulnerability to such problems and develop a healthy and productive and meaningful life. Well, I think that's a pretty comprehensive definition, right? But it really talks about, well, what are these internal and external resources? Well, it just turns out that two psychologists, Granfield and Cloud, in 1999 wrote this book, Coming Clean. Now, the reason behind that was that there were a lot of people that wanted help, couldn't afford to go into treatment. So they wanted to give them a model, a way of thinking about what they needed to do in their life to create a foundation for their recovery. So they came up with this concept of recovery capital. So this is how they defined it. The volume, so recovery capital is the volume of internal and external, right? There's those two words again. Internal and external assets that can be brought to bear to initiate and sustain recovery. Sounds similar to White's definition, doesn't it? From alcohol and other drug problems. So let's take a look at what are these external and internal recovery capital assets that we can have. So everything outside of the circle is external to us, right? So just look at a few of them.
There must be something else.
Yeah, no, I don't know where it all is.
Can you mute them over there, you guys. Unless you guys want to participate in the lecture, you can help out. Okay, so on the outside are things like, well, one of the things we found is that if a doctor is put in diversion, right, for his alcohol or drug problem, and they're usually put in diversion for 5 years, it's unbelievable. The recovery rate in those 5 years is like 98% of doctors are continuing to stay sober in 5 years. That's a big piece of recovery capital, because what happens if they fail diversion? They lose their license. It's not easy to become a medical doctor. They've got a big stake in involvement. I've done studies to show that if family is involved from the very beginning of somebody's treatment, that people do better as a result of that. If you got legal problems, right? You got a DUI or something like that. Well, you've got that external motivation to clean that up. If you've got a medical problem, if your partner is going to divorce you, you know, if you did an intervention and your kids confronted you, all of these things, right? Today we have sober companion. If somebody's got a sober companion, that helps a lot. Developing a good relationship with a sponsor or some peer support. Wonderful. All of those things are important, and they're very important in the early stages of recovery, because we don't yet have developed these internal assets. Those things take some work. They take a focus. Now, the problem with all of those things that are external, every one of them are temporary. Every one of them can change. Let's say you're going to a great meeting every Tuesday night. Then all of a sudden there's a new secretary and you develop a resentment towards that secretary. I'm not going to go back to that meeting. Well, you've just lost some recovery capital. Let's say you're working with your sponsor. God forbid, we all die. Your sponsor passes away. You have legal trouble. All of a sudden, there's no more legal trouble. You know, you're in trouble with your liver. Now your liver's healing up. So when our foundation is based on things like that, then what happens is a lot of people lose their motivation, right? Because their motivation is to resolve a problem and not to grow. We call that deficit motivation. I want to fix the hole in my roof when it's raining. If you live in Southern California, you never fix the hole in your roof. It doesn't ever rain. But when it rains, oh my God, I got to get that hole in my roof fixed. But as soon as it stops raining, you're not motivated anymore. So that's the problem, is a lot of these things, these external motivations, are based on that kind of a deficit motivation, those external assets. Now let's look at what happens inside of us to support recovery, right? You know, we talk about how in the program, right? What is it? Honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness, right? What we also talk about is an awareness of what we're doing and what's going on for us. An ability to accept the fatal nature of our condition. See, those things become very important. I've got things like acceptance, learning how to support yourself, developing nourishing attitudes, attitudes that help you grow versus toxic attitudes, you know, that keep you stuck, making a 100% commitment to your recovery, right? We go to any lengths, right? Rarely have we seen a person fail, right? Those kinds of things. Curiosity is incredibly important, and you're going to see curiosity being essential to the development of emotional sobriety. Because when you get upset, you got to start getting curious about what's going on with you. You got to start asking, not what's wrong with them, but what's wrong, what's off with me. Bill said when he was writing the 12 and 12 that it's a spiritual axiom. Every time I'm disturbed, no matter the cause, there's something wrong with me. Well, most of us, I get upset. I think about what's wrong with you, not what's wrong with me. God, if you just weren't such a knucklehead, I'd be okay. Right? I blame you. Well, we're going to see blame is a sign of the level of consciousness that we have. In order to change, we have to develop a different kind of consciousness than we had when we walked in this program. So if you think of consciousness as developing in stages, it's a very helpful way to think about it. Now, Piaget, a brilliant psychologist, studied the cognitive development in children. And what Piaget said is that kids' brain develops so that in certain times how a child thinks about things changes as that brain matures. So for example, early on, children are very concrete in their thinking. There's a great story that goes, Johnny comes home from school with his brother Pete. Pete's 14, Johnny's 5 years old in the story. Mom comes out, 4 cookies for the brother, 2 cookies for Johnny. Well, Johnny throws a fit. Why does my brother get 4 cookies? I got 2 cookies. That's unfair. I should get 4 cookies, right? So mom tries to explain rationally, Pete's, he's 15. He played tennis after school. He's a bigger boy than you are. He needs more calories. Yeah. Johnny goes, yeah, right, mom. I want 4 cookies. So out of frustration, mom goes and gets a butter knife and comes and cuts his 2 cookies in half. Now he has 4 cookies on his plate. He looks up and says, you're the best mom in the world. You see what's going on? Right? He doesn't understand those 4 pieces of cookie are not the same as his brother got, but he's got 4 and his brother's got 4. That's all that matters. The consciousness that you have when you walked into this program is the same thing. It's a lens that you look at the world through, and you don't even know you have it on. It just seems that this is the way things are. This is the way things are supposed to be. But it's a lens. And what we come to know as we do this work is that your lens needs adjusting. Paul C calls it a new pair of glasses, right? Your lens needs adjusting. You don't realize how out of focus the world is. One of the ways we need adjusting is that blaming things. Blaming things does not help solve a problem. It becomes a part of the problem. But that's usually our first go-to. So the consciousness that you bring into the program cannot help grow you in the program. You've got to hear that. The consciousness that you have cannot grow you. You have to challenge yourself. You have to be curious about what's going on here. How come I'm reacting this way? Not why. Notice the word, how come I'm reacting this way? What's going on with me? What are my expectations? What are my beliefs around this thing? You have to be able to take that lens and put it on the table and start looking at it. And then hopefully get a better prescription so that you improve your vision on things. So this is Dr. Carl Jung. That's Roland Hazard. Roland Hazard was from a very wealthy family in Connecticut, went over to treat with Dr. Jung in Europe. You guys have heard the story, I'm sure, many times, but this is what Jung said to Roland Hazard when he said, I don't think I can help you. And he was explaining to him what might help him, right, in his quest to get sobriety. He says, here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have what are called vital spiritual experiences. Well, these experiences appear to be in the nature, now pay attention to this, of huge emotional displacements and rearrangements. The consciousness of an individual changes because of the spiritual experience, right? He goes, the ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of these individuals, of these men, are suddenly cast to one side. And a completely new set of conceptions, I'll say it, a new consciousness, right? And motives begin to dominate them. There's a major psychic change that happens in our recovery. And we're going to look at that psychic change as emotional sobriety tonight. That's what we're going to talk about it as. Now, this radical shift in our consciousness involves changing our beliefs, our understanding, and our attitudes or our consciousness about our relationship with. And that's what I want you to think about. Spirituality is a relationship with the mystery, right? But you're also in relationship with yourself. You're in relationship with other people. You're in relationship with life itself. Emotional sobriety is about having a new relationship in all those different spheres of your life, in all those different dimensions. Now, I like to think about it when we have a healthier relationship with our problems, we realize that we have limitations. We accept that about ourselves. That's what the essence of step one is, right? Right? Admit it, we were powerless over alcohol, or if it's NA, we admit it, we were powerless over our addiction, that our lives have become unmanageable. So we accept the limitation we have in terms of our relationship with drugs, with our addiction. And now we get the second half of that is, guess what? Your life is also unmanageable, buddy. It's not just over here, but it's the big, big enchilada over here, right? That kind of thing. So we have to shift and accept our limitations. We have to look at our relationship with ourselves. See, self-esteem is the reputation you have with yourself. Think about that a minute. It's the reputation you have with yourself. Well, what kind of reputation do you have with yourself? Do you trust yourself? Do you like yourself? Do you feel confident about how to handle situations in your life? That's what that's about. Our relationship with others. Do you know what it means to have a healthy relationship? Do you know what it means to make room for two people in a relationship instead of room for rules and supposed tos and shoulds? Probably not. And then finally, our shift is in alignment with reality. Instead of when shit happens, we object to it and get upset or throw a pity party and invite all our friends over. You know, that's right. That's what most of us will do. This isn't the way it's supposed to be. This is unfair. I love that one. How many people have experienced things being unfair? Every one of you. Raise your hands. If you're not raising your hands, you're not honest with yourself. Come on now. Every one of us. Right? So we get hung up in these ideas about how things are supposed to be. And now it makes it very difficult to cope with it because we get hung up with getting upset that it's not supposed to be this way. Well, that's a serious problem because we can't grow up until we learn how to deal with life as it is, how to cope with life as it is, and let go of these should be's and supposed to be's. So this is quite an order, right? What an order. I can't go through with it. This shift creates an alignment with reality, right? That's what we're doing. We're trying to get aligned with reality, accepting and coping with life as it is, rather than demanding life to conform to our expectations. You are going to see that that's the essence of what Bill was talking about in terms of emotional sobriety. So without just one other thing before we jump into Bill's letter, I want to put this into context. Like I said, recovery goes through stages, just like our cognitive development goes through stages. Our consciousness goes through stages. Ernie Larson, I love Ernie's work. He talked about stage one recovery. Bill called stage one recovery as getting sober, right? That's the first step. In NA, they call it getting clean, right? Probably the easiest of all, because the second step is staying sober. That's hard. Getting there, we've all done it many times, right? But staying that way is difficult. But this is what Ernie says. He says, stage one is breaking the bonds of our addiction, of our primary addiction. He says, but while abstinence may get you out of a bad place, but getting out of a bad place just gets you out. It's not the same as getting into a better place, right? The consciousness that's creating a problem can't solve it. But we got to get physically sober to start to look at our consciousness, because when we're not sober, we're unconscious, right? We operate unconsciously. So stage two recovery gets at the underlying patterns and habits that caused us trouble in the first place. He says, if nothing changes and nothing changes, the same results are going to continue to show up in our life. Looking at the patterns and habits that cause trouble in the first place. Bill calls to this. If you go and read step 8, he says there's nothing like that will yield better results than to look at all of the people you've harmed and extricate from that study, that investigation, the pattern and habits that underlied all of the difficulties you had with people. You will be able to learn a lot about yourself if you do that, a ton. And that's what he's saying is stage 2 recovery is about. He goes on to say that in stage 2 recovery, it's about dealing with the mountain of living is what stage 2 recovery is all about. It's about getting on with life by facing those patterns, habits, and attitudes that control your life. And which for perhaps the first time in your life, you're clear-headed enough, sober enough, clean enough, or emotionally sound enough to face. Right? That's what stage 2 recovery is all about. Now, it's daunting and it's exciting at the same time. Right? Well, what I say all the time to people that are doing this work is only the best in you can see the worst in you. I'll say that again. Only the best inside of you can see the worst in your behavior. So when you're looking at the worst, instead of beating yourself up, give yourself a pat on the back because you're doing something that is going to open the door to your freedom. Unfortunately, most people, when they see the worst in themselves, they feel ashamed that they're not who they think they should be. Well, wait, hello, you're not. I'll tell you that right now. None of you are who you think you are. Let's just clean that up right now. You're just not. You know, you're a legend in your own mind and you're not a legend. I mean, you're great and you've got another side to you. We're all Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hydes. Every one of us. You know, every one of us. You're great and you're shitty at the same time. That's the reality of it. And you got to just face that. It's okay. But see, we go through life and say, I can't let anybody see that side of me. My God, they're not going to love me. They're not going to accept me. I won't belong anymore. So we play this game. It's a big game. It's a big game. And everybody's playing it. You know, when you go out on that first date, you don't say to someone, hey, you know, I'm really interested in seeing you some more. But I just want you to know that as our relationship develops, I'm going to start treating you like shit. They're going to go, what? And you know what? They're going to do the same thing to you. But no one wants to own it. No one wants to own that. I guess if we did that, the species would stop, wouldn't it? We wouldn't be able to propagate this. Nobody would see anybody. Everybody would just run for the hills. So maybe it's good we don't say it to each other, but it would be honest. It would be honest, wouldn't it? We save our worst behavior. And there's a reason for this. And at some point, I might tell you about it. We save our worst behavior for those people that we love the most and care about the most. Now, I don't know if God has a funny sense of humor about that or what, but there isn't something that's any truer than that statement. You will not treat strangers the way you'll treat your partner. You won't talk to strangers the way you talk to your partner. I mean, we just don't do it. But hopefully by the time we're done talking today, you'll get some understanding. So stage 2 recovery really concerns the development of this emotional sobriety. We have to have it. And you're going to see what that means as now I get into the meat of this whole thing. Well, this is that quote from the 12 and 12 that I talked about. Here we bring it into practice, all of the 12 steps of the program in our daily lives so that we and those about us can discover emotional sobriety. So let's go discover some emotional sobriety together. You ready? Good. Here we go.
I think many oldsters who have put our booze cure to severe but successful tests still find that they often lack emotional sobriety. Perhaps they will be the spearhead for the next major development in AA, the development of much more real maturity and balance, which is to say, humility, in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God.
So these excerpts are taken from the AA Grapevine article that was published in 1958 that actually was written in 1956, and it was a letter to a fellow out in California who wrote to the General Service Office in New York and said, hey, I've got depression, and I'm wondering if anybody can share some ideas about how the steps might help me with my depression. So that letter was now taken and published in the 1958 Grapevine. Now, it's not the first time Bill used the term emotional sobriety. I just showed you back in 1950 or 52, when the 12 and 12 was published, that he was already talking about it. So I think it's safe for us to assume that that was part of his conversation. As he said here, he hoped it would be the next major development in the program. That did not happen. For another day and another time, we could talk about some ideas I have why that didn't take place. But that's beyond the scope of what we're doing today. Let's focus instead. By the way, I think it's starting to happen. I was telling that to Paul today, that I start to see a critical mass starting to develop around this whole thing. And let's hope that it does, and that we get to a tipping point and this becomes mainstream in the program. He talks about the development of much more real maturity and balance as emotional sobriety. Now, we're going to go into what that means, but he says, which is to say humility in our relations with ourselves, with our fellows, and with God. I added to that in relationship with our problems and also in relationship to life itself, right? So what does it mean to have humility in all these areas? What does maturity mean? What does balance mean? Well, for our sake today, we're going to define maturity as the transcendence of environmental support to self-support. I'll say that again. We're transcending environmental support to self-support. Well, what's an example of environmental support? Well, every one of us, by the way, and I think this gets pathologized, this emotional dependency, like something's wrong with us. There's nothing wrong with us. A stage in our development is to be completely dependent on another person to be okay. When you were in your mother's fetus, when you were a fetus in your mother's womb, she did everything for you. She provided oxygen. She provided nourishment. She was an on-call Uber service. She took you everywhere. She provided security for you. She gave you everything that you needed to begin your development in life. The minute you were born, what did you have to do? First thing we did is to breathe. So instead of getting oxygen from the umbilical cord, that's where we were getting it before, right? We now have to interact with the atmosphere around us and do what? Inhale and exhale. That was your first step towards self-support. You were supporting yourself by respirating and taking oxygen into your body and exchanging carbon dioxide with the atmosphere. That's what you were doing. Now, you continue to do that. Now, when you were around 1 year old, up to that point in time, you were probably pushed around in a stroller or carried anywhere. You started to crawl at some point. Crawling was getting you ready for what? Walking. You do not have to tell a child to crawl. This force that I'm describing in you, right, this life force, moves you towards being what you can be. You want to crawl because you want to actualize your potential. You want to move towards wholeness. That's just hardwired. It's instinctual. So right around 1, the child's done with the crawling part. They've developed all the coordination of the different parts of the brain, and they start pulling themselves up to the table, right? And what do? They let go. And they do this thing, right? I do that now at my age. So that's another story for another time. But they let go. And what are they doing? They're trying to learn how to balance themselves in what? A 3-dimensional plane. They got to tighten certain muscles. They got to relax other muscles. They got to navigate that space. You don't tell a child to do that. I hope nobody told you to do that. You just wanted to do it. That's in you. And then you take your first step, right? And your parents go crazy. Oh my God, you're doing your first step, as though you weren't going to do that. I don't know what's that about. Why are we so surprised? that it's not going to happen. It always happens. If it didn't happen, we'd be crawling here today. We wouldn't walk in. We'd be on our hands and knees, wouldn't we? So you take your first step, and what usually happens? Stumble or you fall. How many times do you fall before you get this walking down? As many as you need to. Thank God you don't have the consciousness that you have as an adult. Right? What would happen? Shit, I did this 20 times and I failed. I'm giving this crap up. This walking stuff is for someone else. It's not for me. Let somebody else figure it out. Thank God you don't have that part of you developed yet. Right? Because you do it as many times as you need to without evaluating yourself, without putting yourself down, without having an expectation that you're supposed to do it a certain way. And by doing that, you allow yourself to learn. You develop the ability to walk, and I know you all did it because you walked in here. I didn't see any of you crawl today. It's amazing, isn't it, when you stop to think about it? That is a powerful force. That's inside you. That's the force that gets awakened in your recovery when you come to the program, because it connects you to your desire to become whole or holy, if you want to put it in that way. Right? Isn't that interesting? We talk about holiness as a part of spirituality. Well, that's what it's about, is becoming what you can be. That's what this whole thing is about. And that's inside you. Nobody's given that to you, and nobody can give that to you. That's what you have to get in touch with if your recovery is going to work. And if you do, it's going to grow you along these lines that Bill is talking about. You're going to learn to walk in life. You're going to learn to support yourself. You're going to learn to start taking care of yourself instead of manipulating everybody else to do things for you or to make you feel good. Wow. Amen to that. Come on. Can I get an amen? That's right. That's right. It's an amazing process, isn't it? When I lay it out like that. That's what Bill is discovering here. That's the quest we're on. Now, the problem with emotional development, different than physical development. See, emotionally, we need a lot more to happen to grow ourselves up in a good way, right? That is very dependent on those people around us. Nobody has to tell you to walk. You want to do that. Really, nobody has to tell you to learn how to take care of yourself. You want to do that too. But it's so dependent on the kind of input you get, right? You hear a lot about attachment today. Attachment. If you had an insecure attachment, you're fucked. I mean, essentially, that's a clinical term, by the way. But, you know, I mean, you know, it's going to be a struggle for you the rest of your life. And then you could have a chaotic attachment. You're also fucked. I mean, there's all these things. But the good news is all of that stuff that happened to you, you can grow beyond that because of what I just talked to you about. You are not determined, as Freud thought we were determined by that crap. You are not. That's the good news, is you have the ability to become what you can be, regardless of what kind of a shitty upbringing you had, regardless of what experiences you had or didn't have, regardless of the kind of wounds or trauma that you're carrying through life. You know, today we don't talk about post-traumatic stress anymore. It's post-traumatic growth. Every trauma can be dealt with in a certain way to help you grow and become what you can be. Every one of them can. Every one of them. So this is an amazing process that Bill is laying out here. And then he goes on, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about what is humility, because we kind of get confused about it. I went to the American Psychological Association's Dictionary of Psychological Terms, and this is what they say. Humility is the quality of being humble. It is characterized by a low focus on the self. We get that, right? Right? The steps are made to deflate the ego. The ego is self, right? Self will run riot. That we think is the root of our problems. Selfishness, self-centeredness, right? So this is a low focus on self. And listen to this, an accurate, not an over or underestimated sense of one's accomplishments and worth. That we're able to just accept ourselves as we are, not have to be someone else to be okay. And then, and I love this the third definition here, an acknowledgement of one's limitations, of one's imperfections, of one's mistakes, gaps in knowledge, and so on. So humility is about being okay with being Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. It's okay with being great and shitty at the same time. That's what humility is about, is accepting yourself as you are. That doesn't mean you're not going to strive to be better, but you can't be better until you accept yourself as you are. That's what the first step is doing. You've got to admit your powerlessness before you can find another power. It's not going to happen. You have to admit your unmanageability before you can learn how to start living your life in a different way. There's no way around that. Trust me, I've tried. And I think you have too. Right? Easier, softer way. Where is it? Can somebody show it to me? Please, please. There isn't one. Bill said it's a simple program, but a price must be paid. A price must be paid.
Those adolescent urges that so many of us have for top approval, perfect security, and perfect romance, urges quite appropriate to age 17, prove to be an impossible way of life when we are at age 47 or 57.
So I love this, right? Because he starts to capture some of the ideas we have that get in the way of us learning how to support ourselves, to get in the way to learn how to walk, so to speak, right? He talks about those adolescent urges we have. So at some point in our life, we come up with an idea of who we have to be okay. I call it our idealized image, right? It's the idealized self. If I could just be like this, then you're going to love me. Then you're going to accept me. Then I'm going to belong in the world. Every one of us has our own signature on what that looks like. Means it's idiosyncratic. What your idealized image is different than mine, except in one way, there's similarities. It's always an absolute. So the minute I decide I have to be this, there's no black and white. There's no more gray in my life. Life becomes black and white. Either I'm okay or I'm not okay. You got that? And with this process comes a lot of self-hatred, because as soon as you're not the way you think you should be, the should being tied to the idealized image now, right? Because that idealized image creates all these rules about how you're supposed to be. Soon as you're not the way you should be, you hate yourself. And you're hating yourself because by hating yourself, you're trying to get yourself, spare the rod, spoil the child. You're hating yourself to try to manipulate yourself to be the way you think you should be. Doesn't work. It wouldn't have worked if you did that when you were walking. You little foolish kid walking the way you're walking. You can't learn to walk that way. None of us would have learned to walk if we would have criticized ourselves and hated ourselves. We didn't have that. So this idea, top approval, everybody's going to like me. Yeah, right. But I thought that at one point, that I could only be okay if everybody liked me. Perfect security, that I'm going to feel okay all the time. I'm never going to be depressed. I'm never going to be confused. I'm never going to be lost. I'm always going to know what to do. I'm never going to be anxious. I'm never going to be insecure. That's perfect security. That if I was like that, I'd be okay. And then this idea of perfect romance, well, that I'm going to find a woman, or if you're a woman, you're going to find a man that's just going to give you everything you want all the time. They're going to just do what you want whenever you want it. God, she never showed up in my life. Thank God. Thank God. It's a good thing, by the way. This is why I say trouble doesn't mean something's wrong. Trouble is an invitation to grow up. So when you're struggling in your relationships, thank your partner. I am so glad you are pissing me off right now, because there is a lesson in this. You're going to remind him this one. I know. I saw that look already. Or he's going to remind you. All right, all right. There's a lesson in this that's important for me to help me become what I can be, to help me learn how to stand on my own 2 feet and not depend on you to be okay. Wow. What a different way of thinking about our life, isn't it? Huh? You see how your consciousness is starting to change? I am manipulating each and every one of you. I am putting you in a trance. And I'm really waking you up from your trance is what I'm doing. Right? Because you're in a trance. All that other nonsense we learn about how things are supposed to be, it's all bullshit. It's all trance. Don Miguel Ruiz calls it our domestication. Our domestication. We are conditioned to think a certain way, and none of that thinking is going to serve you well in your life. Or I need to say, I don't know if it's that black and white, most of it won't. By the way, the 4 Agreements is a wonderful companion to emotional sobriety. Wonderful companion, as you're going to see. So Bill calls this by expecting that this is what my life is supposed to be. He calls it an impossible way of life because it won't work. You're never going to feel, you're never going to have top approval. You're never going to have perfect security, perfect romance. It's not going to happen. It's fantasy time. It's time for us to grow up and give up these childlike fantasies. Can I go on, or are you sufficiently depressed at this point? No, hopefully you're excited.
Since AA began, I've taken immense wallops in all those areas because of my failure to grow up, emotionally and spiritually. My God, how painful it is to keep demanding the impossible, and how very painful to discover finally that all along we had the cart before the horse. Then comes the final agony of seeing how awfully wrong we have been, but still finding ourselves unable to get off the emotional merry-go-round.
Wow. Bill gets criticized a lot for a lot of things. I don't know if he gets his due for his humility and his really, shedding a light on our, the possibilities for our growth. His failure to grow up emotionally and spiritually. He says how painful it is to demand the impossible. What is the impossible? To demand that life, that my partner, that I will live up to a certain expectation and therefore I'll be okay. You see, if my being okay is based on a consciousness that I call the I'm okay if consciousness, you will never be okay. I'll say that again. If your life is based on a consciousness that says I'm okay if, you will never be okay. You will continue to be upset, disturbed, get angry, try to manipulate people to do what you think they need to do for you to be okay. And people will get pissed at you, and relationships with you walk away from you, shut you out, do whatever they can because they don't want to be manipulated. They don't want to be someone that has to serve your wishes and your commands whenever you want them. That's the darn truth of this whole thing. And it's a painful truth for a lot of us. He says we had the cart before the horse. See, if I'm expecting the world to be a certain way for me to be okay, instead of expecting myself to be a certain way to be okay, I have put the cart before the horse. But when I put the cart before the horse, it means I got to be really good at controlling and manipulating you. Because my welfare, I erroneously think, depends on how you're behaving, how you treat me, how you talk to me. Oh, you can't talk to me that way. That's no way to talk to somebody you care about. Where did that rule come from? I don't want a relationship like that. I want something a little looser. Talk to me any way you want. Scream, shout, do whatever you need to do, and I'll take care of myself. You take care of yourself. Let's do that for a while. If you need to scream and tell me I'm an asshole, tell me I'm an asshole. You're probably right. I mean, that's okay. I can be an asshole and still be okay. Can you love an asshole? My wife says, no, I'm not so sure. I said, I don't fault you for that. I understand it. I don't need to prove to anyone I'm good or not bad. when you get to this place. It's not about that. It's about self-acceptance, not getting somebody else to think a certain way about you. He says, you know, finally, all along we had the cart before the horse. Then comes the final agony. We start to become aware of this, right? We get a certain amount of recovery. We start to get honest with ourselves. We start to become aware. Hey, what's the common denominator? Me. You know, all my problems. What's the common denominator? I am, right? All these things are about me. I'm the one that's struggling with these relationships. I'm the one that's having difficulty. I'm the one whose life is not working. I'm the one that's still acting like a victim from what happened before. That's us. That's what we're doing. Nobody else is doing that to us. But Bill says, how do we get off that merry-go-round? When we're on it, what do we need to do to change? Well, thank God he's got some answers for us, right? He's not going to leave us hanging with this thing. Thank you, Bill. But before we get to Bill, this is Fritz Perls. He's the founder of Gestalt Therapy. Some call him the co-founder with his wife, Laura. And this is what Fritz says: as long as you fight a symptom, it will become worse. This was the observation. So many people, when you tried to control your drinking, did it get better? What happened? Got worse, didn't it? Right? For each and every one of us. When you try to fight a symptom, it will become worse. If you take responsibility for what you're doing to yourself, if you take responsibility for how you produce your symptoms, how you produce your illness, how you produce your existence, then you get in touch with yourself. And that's when your growth starts to begin. And that's when you have a chance to start to grow up and find and discover emotional sobriety. Now, it's interesting. Here's another psychotherapist. This is Dr. Nathaniel Brandon. He wrote 30, 40 years after Fritz wrote. He said, now listen, it's the same idea, right? So long as an individual cannot accept the fact of what he is, cannot permit himself to be fully aware of it, cannot fully admit the truth into his consciousness, he cannot move beyond that point. If he denies the reality of his condition, he cannot proceed to alter it. Cannot achieve healthy changes in his personality. Isn't that the problem that most people have in relapse? They haven't taken step one. They still think they can control their drinking. Well, if you can, we'll tip our hat to you, right? You're a better person than I am. But if you have this disease, you're not going to be able to do it.
How to translate a right mental conviction into a right emotional result, and so into easy, happy, and good living. Well, that's not only the neurotic's problem, it's the problem of life itself for all of us who have got to the point of real willingness to hew to right principles in all of our affairs.
So Bill realized is that we might start to get the idea, like I'm sharing with you today. You know, I see a lot of your heads nodding. You start to understand what I'm talking about. But how are we going to take it from here to something that becomes a part of us, right? That's the way that I talk about it in psychology, that's integrated, right? How do you make it available to you so that it shows up in your daily lives, right? That's the quest here. And there's three ways you do that. You practice, then you practice, and then you practice. Emotional sobriety is not a state that we achieve. It's a process that you bring into your life. You got to think of it that way. It's having a different relationship with, right? It's about a different relationship with your problems, with yourself, with your relationship with others, and with life. And there's going to be times when unconsciously, some of your expectations about how things are supposed to be or how things should be are going to show up that you weren't aware of until you get mad about it or upset about it or depressed about it. And then you're going to discover it. So you got to understand that this work is about constantly uncovering, discovering, surface. It's kind of a surface and explore operation that's ongoing. That's what emotional sobriety looks like. We don't achieve it as though we just set up residence there. We visit there a lot. is what we do, and we try to get there. Dr. Kempler, my mentor, used to say to me, Alan, he says, there's nothing wrong with striving to be perfect as long as you never fool yourself into thinking you can achieve it. There's a lot of wisdom in that.
Even then, as we hew away, peace and joy may still elude us. That's the place so many AA oldsters have come to. And it's a hell of a spot, literally. How shall our unconscious, from which so many of our fears, compulsions, and phony aspirations still stream, be brought into line with what we actually believe, know, and want? How to convince our dumb, raging, and hidden Mr. Hyde becomes our main task.
I mean, there's so much insight into this. So he talks about our unconscious, and in our unconscious lies these fears that generate these compulsions and phony aspirations. Well, what is in our unconscious that does that? It's Dr. Karen Harnick called it a basic anxiety. And what is that basic anxiety? That you're not going to be loved, that you're not going to be accepted, that you're not going to belong. And so remember what I said that does early on. That anxiety now causes us to search for a solution. We call it the search for glory. Well, if I just become this, hallelujah, my life is going to work. Right? So we search for that solution. We come up with this idealized self. Now that's the compulsion. I must be that way. The phony aspiration is I can be that way perfectly. Remember, I said there's an absolute there. I must be this way or I'm not okay. That's all going on in your unconscious. Later on, we discover this thing. How can all of that, right, be brought into line with what I like to say reality, with who you really are? Through a lot of hard work, through a lot of inner searching. The word I used earlier today was curiosity. I want you to leave here incredibly curious about yourself. Very curious about how you're functioning, what you're doing, and how you're doing it. That begins the path of this journey, right? Now he goes, how can that be brought in line and convince our dumb, raging, and hidden Mr. Hyde? You see, Mr. Hyde says, no. It's not about me changing. All these other things have to change for me to be okay. Remember what I said, it's based on the consciousness, I'm okay if. Right? So the dumb and raging Mr. Hyde is holding on to that. It's got to be this way because that's how things are. That's how I'm going to be better. Mr. Hyde is still connected to the umbilical cord, thinks that he needs that environmental support to be okay. It's the part of us that has never grown up. King baby, queen baby, those are phrases we use to describe it in the program. Every one of us has that. And it's not because you're bad or you're messed up. You just haven't grown up. That's all. Just haven't grown up yet. And you can do that. That's one thing you can do is grow up.
I've recently come to believe that this can be achieved. I believe so because I begin to see many benighted ones, folks like you and me, commencing to get results. Last autumn, depression, having no really rational cause at all, almost took me to the cleaners. I began to be scared that I was in for another long chronic spell. Considering the grief I've had with depressions, it wasn't a bright prospect.
By the way, you know who's reading this? Lucille Ball's husband, Nick Luckenbill. Doesn't he have a great voice? Just love his voice.
I kept asking myself, why can't the 12 steps work to release depression? By the hour, I stared at the St. Francis prayer. It's better to comfort than to be comforted. Here was the formula, all right. But why didn't it work?
So put a bookmark in that, right? If I don't come back to address that, say, Alan, remember, it's better to comfort than to be comforted.
Suddenly, I realized what the matter was. My basic flaw had always been dependence, almost absolute dependence on people or circumstances to supply me with prestige, security, and the like. Failing to get these things according to my perfectionist dreams and specifications, I had fought for them. And when defeat came, so did my depression.
Is it coming together for you now? Right? With all the stuff I've shared with you before, right? You start to see how it becomes a gestalt. So what he realized was that his flaw had been this dependence on environmental support, right? We're going to equate that. That's synonymous with emotional dependence, right? That I need you to behave and treat me a certain way for me to be okay. I need a circumstance to happen a certain way for me to be okay. See, that's the dependence he's talking about. He lived a life that's based on contingencies. I'm okay if, right? That's the I'm okay if stuff. So when he said he fought for these, so what happens when we're emotionally dependent? We're going to react to the stress of that, to the tension of that in one of three ways. We're going to turn against someone. So if you're not doing what I want you to do, I'm going to try to force you to do it. Well, you know, you're not a very good partner when you don't act that way. So I manipulate you by telling you you should be this way if you want to be a good person. Or I threaten you. Well, if you don't clean that up, I'm not going to be in a relationship with you anymore. I'm going to leave you. I'm going to leave you because I want you to do what I want you to do. And I'm going to try to manipulate you by getting you anxious that I'm going to abandon you. There's all kinds of tricks that we play. That's the turning against. We try to control the other person by telling them how they should be or shaming them as they are. It's terrible. It's horrible behavior. Probably was done to you as a kid. Parents tried to control you by shaming you and making you feel bad about yourself. It's a horrible way that we raise kids. People don't do better when they feel bad about themselves. They just don't. People don't do better by being told how bad they are. Doesn't work. No matter what tricks you try. The other possibility is instead of turning against, you turn towards and you apologize. I'm sorry that I upset you. I'm sorry that this happened. I'm sorry this, that. I'm sorry that I'm not more lovable. You know, stuff like that. So you internalize it. You take it all on yourself. You're a people pleaser. The third thing is you say, to hell with this. I'm done. I'm checking out. And so that's the turning away from. You just said, I'm going to cut off this relationship. It's a toxic relationship. All three of these things are reactive to the tension of things not going your way. None of them are going to help you grow up. The only thing that helps you grow up is to learn how to stay connected and add more self. Now, I know we're probably way over time. Is that okay for me to keep going? If any of you need to leave, please feel free to get up. You can't interrupt me. I'm uninterruptible. Is that okay if I go on? Is that so? Any of you need to go right now would be a good time. If you do have to leave, please go. I'll just present you for the next 24 hours. No, I won't take it personal. I promise. I don't take that stuff personal anymore. Everybody needs to take care of themselves. If you need to get up and go to the bathroom, go to the bathroom. Take care of yourself. Okay, I'll just go on. Okay. So what Bill said is that his style was to move against people. He tried to control people. And what did Bill build into the program? There's no leaders in our program, right? What is the leadership in our program? A loving God as he may express himself in our group consciousness. So Bill set it up that he wasn't going to get his way all the time. Well, that was right. That's the right thing to do because there has to be room for everyone. The program can't just be what one of us wants it to be. It has to be something that's collectively determined, right? But he got frustrated. When things didn't go his way, he felt defeated and then he got depressed because he did not have an alternative. He discovered one in terms of what we're talking about now. He's going to tell us what it is here in a little while. But that's me. So emotional dependence is the result of this developmental delay. we never take the next step to transcend that environmental support to establish our self-support in our life, right? That's what you guys see now, right? That's what maturity is, self-support. So this is what Fritz says about this. He says our dependency, right, our needing environmental support makes slaves out of us, especially if this is the dependency of our self-esteem. If you need encouragement, if you need praise, pats on the back from everybody, then you turn everybody into your judge. I say you turn everybody into your critical parent. That's not a fun way to live. Dr. Nathaniel Brandon says it this way: low self-esteem, emotional dependence, causes an excessive preoccupation with gaining the approval and avoiding the disapproval of others, hungering for validation and support at every turn of our existence. Wow. That sucks. Doesn't it? It sucks. Those of us that experience it's terrible. Yeah, we're not, we're puppets on a string. Everybody else is pulling our strings. So as I said to you, we get stuck in our emotional development at the I'm okay if stage and never reach, and this is what emotional sobriety is, the I'm okay even if. I'm okay even if things don't turn out the way that I want them to.
There wasn't a chance of making the outgoing love of St. Francis a workable and joyous way of life until these fatal and almost absolute dependencies were cut away. Because I had over the years undergone a little spiritual development, the absolute quality of these frightful dependencies had never before been so starkly revealed.
So I took off my jacket so you could see the t-shirt. Imagine if you weren't bound by those things. Imagine if you could unhook your dependence on things being a certain way to be okay. Do you start to see where our freedom comes from? That's what true freedom is about. That's what emotional sobriety is about. It's about developing a consciousness that helps you experience that freedom. That's what it's about.
Reinforced by what grace I could secure in prayer, I found I had to exert every ounce of will and action to cut off these faulty emotional dependencies upon people, upon AA, indeed upon any act or circumstance whatsoever. Then could I be free to love as Francis did. Emotional and instinctual satisfactions I saw were really the extra dividends of having love, offering love, and expressing love appropriate to each relation of life.
See, this is the incredible insight he had, that he had to cut off these dependents. People are blown away when they read that he had to cut off his dependence upon AA. Everybody thought, well, God, didn't I exchange one unhealthy dependence for a healthier one right upon the program? No, because the program does not reinforce dependency. It helps you grow up and stand on your own 2 feet. That's what the goal of the program is. It's emotional sobriety, learning to support yourself. That doesn't mean you don't need anyone. But when I support myself, if I'm in trouble and I've got a close relationship with Paul, I call him up and say, Paul, I need to talk for a while. Are you available? I take responsibility to get my needs met. I don't sit and wait. Well, let me see if he's a good friend. He knows I'm not in a good place. And I'm going to see if he calls me. He didn't call me today. I'm going to see if he calls me. Give him 3 days. Fuck Paul. What a fucking asshole. I'm not going to fucking talk to him ever again. What kind of a program is that guy working, right? Doesn't call a fellow member of the program when they're in trouble. We do that shit. We laugh about it, but how many times does your passivity get expressed as dependency on the other person? Because you're not standing up and taking care of yourself. I need to call him. And then if Paul said, hey, Al, I'd love to talk to you, I can do it in a few hours. I say, I'd appreciate it. I don't get upset. What do you mean in a few hours? What kind of an AA member are you? No, I accept him because there's got to be room in our relationship for both of us, not just for what I want. Wow, that's a mouthful.
Plainly, I could not avail myself to God's love until I was able to offer it back to Him by loving others as He would have me. And I couldn't possibly do that so long as I was victimized by false dependencies. For my dependencies meant demand, a demand for the possession and control of the people and the conditions surrounding me. While those words absolute dependence may look like a gimmick, they were the ones that helped to trigger my release into my present degree of stability and quietness of mind, qualities which I am now trying to consolidate by offering love to others, regardless of the return to me.
So you see what he understood. This was his insight. This was his aha moment. He realized his dependency created these demands on how people were supposed to act, how they should be, how life should be, right? That stuff. His demand, then he wanted to possess and control the people and circumstances around him, because if they were the way he wanted them to be, he thought he'd be okay, right? And once he realized that, he could start unhooking. Remember what we said before, you have to own what you're doing before you can do something different. This is why it began to set him free, because he owned what he was doing. He was trying to possess and control everyone and get them to do everything he wanted them to do. And he realized he can't express God's love. If we think of God's love as unconditional, our love can't be unconditional when we have all these expectations attached to them. That's what he was talking about. Now, I don't think we're going to ever be able to love completely unconditionally, but we can strive for it. Remember what I said before, striving for it, as long as you don't fool yourself into thinking you're going to be able to stay there, is a great thing. It's how we make progress. Just like we didn't expect ourselves to walk with our first step. We had to fall a lot of times before we started to master that skill.
This seems to be the primary healing circuit, an outgoing love of God's creation and His people, by means of which we avail ourselves of His love for us. It's most clear that the real current can't flow until our paralyzing dependencies are broken, and broken at depth. Only then can we possibly have a glimmer of what adult love really is.
Adult love is based on I want you, not I need you. Adult love is mature love, and Eric Fromm described it as union with the preservation of integrity. We join, but we don't get lost. We come together, but we honor our need for separateness. So when Bill talked about emotional sobriety as being real maturity and balance, he was also referring to that, being able to balance our togetherness with our separateness. When our consciousness is undeveloped, then we see somebody wanting to be separate as a threat to us. Why don't you want to spend the afternoon with me? I don't understand that. What's going on? Don't you like me anymore? Don't you want to spend every minute of your life with me? If you love me, you wouldn't want to do anything without me. If you love me, you'd give me what I want. If you love me, you would know what I want even before I ask you. Have you ever thought that way? I have. My goodness. That's, by the way, immature love. Just in case somebody wasn't clear on that. That's immature. Adult love creates room for two people, not room for rules. We could do a whole weekend on emotional sobriety and relationships and unpacking these things. But adult love is about room for two people. That other person does not need to do things the way you want them to for everything to be fine. You need to respect their difference is what you need to do if you want things to be fine.
What are you doing next week?
Going to be watching a 4-year-old and a 9-year-old and practicing my emotional sobriety.
If we examine every disturbance we have, great or small, we will find at the root of it some unhealthy dependence and its consequent demand. Let us, with God's help, continually surrender these hobbling demands. Then we can be set free to live and love. We may then be able to gain emotional sobriety.
So this was what he became aware of in terms of what do we need to do to start to grow ourselves along these lines. Every time you're upset, approach it with some curiosity. Examine your disturbance with the following inquiry in mind. What is my demand about how things are supposed to be here? And what grew that demand? What is my unhealthy dependence that makes me think that things need to be this way for me to be okay? In my book, I've got a chart with, and I revised it in my new book on doing some column work, right? Where in the first column, you look at what happened. Second column, your reaction to it. Third column is you identify your demand. Fourth column, you identify your unhealthy dependence. In the fifth column, you look for the possibility of unhooking your demand. That's how we start to grow ourselves, by examining every time we're disturbed, what's going on with me, not what's wrong with them, what's going on with me, no matter what Bill said. If you start to do that, you will grow yourself along these lines. If you don't, you won't.
Of course, I haven't offered you a really new idea, only a gimmick that has started to unhook several of my own hexes at depth. Nowadays, my brain no longer races compulsively in either elation, grandiosity, or depression. I've been given a quiet place in bright sunshine.
Let's hear it for Bill. Thank you, Bill. I really highlighted the word unhook because I think that gives you a good visual of unhooking your expectations, unhooking your demands, unhooking your claims on people, on life, on circumstances, right? But we're almost done and we'll wrap this up. So here's my definition of emotional sobriety. Emotional sobriety is when the best in you does the thinking and talking for all of you. When the best in you does the thinking and talking for all of you. This state of being is achieved when what you do becomes a determining force in your well-being, your emotional well-being. People today in positive psychology, they call it personal agency, right? Rather than allowing your emotional well-being to be overly influenced by external events, circumstances, right? Or by what other people are or are not doing. So we take our center of gravity, and I didn't get into this today because it's, like I said, this talk could go on and on and on with all the stuff that we're learning about this. But we have an emotional center of gravity. When I put my emotional center of gravity in you, now I'm emotionally dependent on you. What you do determines how I'm going to feel, whether I'm in balance or not. So I wake up and I say, honey, how should I feel today? Right? That's what that looks like. When I keep that emotional center of gravity over my feet, I wake up and I might be aware of what's going on with you, but what's going on with you doesn't determine what's going on with me. You may be having a bad day. I might be having a good day. And you know what? That's okay. We can be different. Doesn't mean I don't love you. Just means I feel different that day. There's room for two, not room for rules, right? Got to get rid of the rules. So when you face trouble, add more of your best self, right, to the circumstance. Don't subtract yourself from the conflict or difficulty. And don't erase the other person either, right? Stay, the way I say it is emotional sobriety is about learning how to stay connected when we're having trouble, when there's tension, instead of getting alienated from each other. See, that's what emotional sobriety is. And so when we're in trouble, we don't get alienated. We just stay connected. Like Job's experience with God. He was pissed at God, but he didn't throw God away. He said, I think you're a good person. I'm a good person. What the hell is going on here? What's happening that I'm going through all these trials and tribulations? Dr. Kempler used to say that was the first book on family therapy. Sometimes we discover our best self when we pause, when we live in the gap between the stimulus and the response. That's what Dr. Viktor Frankl discovered. This is the author of Man's Search for Meaning, an incredible book. It's about, the first half is about his experience in the Nazi concentration camps, the Nazi death camps. Second half of his book was about logotherapy, which is the kind of psychotherapy that he developed, right? Discovering our purpose and meaning in life and how important that is. But this is what he says, is there's a space between the stimulus and our response. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. Try to live there. Bill calls it restraint of pen and tongue, right? He says, live in the pause. Dr. Rollo May calls it living in the gap and using, that time in the gap to discover the best possible response. They're all saying the same thing. And this is what Bill said, and this will end my talk today. Sobriety is only the bare beginning. It is only the first gift of the first awakening. If more gifts are to be received, our awakening has to go on. And if it does go on, that we find that bit by bit by bit, we can discard the old life, the one that was based on that emotional dependency, the one that was based on environmental support, right? For a new life that can and does work under any conditions whatever. I'm okay even if is the consciousness that comes from that. Regardless of our worldly success, regardless of pain or joy, regardless of death or failures, a new life of endless possibilities can be lived if we are willing to continue our awakening. So, during COVID, I started a Thursday night emotional sobriety workshop. That's every Thursday night. It's open to anyone that wants to come. I will make available all of that information to you, Paul and Freddie, and you guys can distribute it to anyone that wants it. So just contact them. In addition to this is that we have an emotional sobriety study group. And if you pay $12.99 a month, you get to come into this area. You have access to all my talks, all of these, talks that I do on this stuff, as well as meet with me once a month for an hour, Herb Kagan once a month. We bring in guest speakers. It's an incredible deal. And the $12.99 goes to pay for the administrations, the people that are doing it. The rest of us are all volunteering our time in it. So there's flyers up there. There's little postcards where you can get information about that. I have some books up there. That's my most recent book. That's the 12 Essential Insights for Emotional Sobriety. You have one copy right there. I think it's the best work that I've done yet, and it really captures a lot of what I see as the unfolding of our consciousness as we develop emotional sobriety. And then I've got some of my earlier works out there. This was my first book. That was my first book on emotional sobriety. Got a few copies, and this is how you get in touch with me. We got a workshop coming up in Lambertville, New Jersey on October 30th. Herb Kagan, my partner in crime with this emotional sobriety, we are doing a whole day at Lambertville at the Harmony Hollow Farm on emotional sobriety in the steps. So if you'd like to get into more about how our way of life leads to emotional sobriety, it'll be a phenomenal day. It goes from 10 till 5 p.m. that day. It's a $95 registration fee. But I have other workshops coming up, other things coming up. So if you go and you sign up to get emails from me, you will get those and hear about those things in the future. And we talked about me coming back out and doing a few more things, Paul and Freddie, and you guys will hear about that from them. So thank you.
Okay, a couple more things and we'll end for the evening. First of all, let me see if I got this right. I'm okay, even if the Zoom got mucked up tonight.
You are okay. I'll tell Freddie, you're okay, even though the Zoom got mucked.
No, I don't need it.
You don't need it. See, he's got
I don't
it.
need
He's getting it. He's getting it.
Thanks, brother. So just for those here,
Yes.
there's a lot of things available at the bookstore on the table here, and we'll be able to get that information on how you can pay if you stay around. For those who are on Zoom, those and in St. Louis, we'll make a lot of that, all those things available through the Community Connection Hub next door and through our Recovery Capital StL website. And then also for those who are watching this on a video, we'll get some information on the Recovery Capital StL website that allows you to reach us and get that information to you. So for those also listening, there's so many different ways you can get involved with Recovery Capital StL. Excuse me. Come to a meeting at the Community Connection Hub next door. Bring a meeting to the Community Connection Hub next door. Volunteer for some service, or join us with some donations. RecoveryCapitalStL.org or .com, the hub STL.com, lakeofdreams.org, and the Ken Reitz Foundation.com. There's a flyer available here on the table. We'll make it available on the website. Talks a little bit about who we are, Recovery Capital StL. Talks a little bit more about why we're trying to do what we're trying to do. Books available on the table, and I'll ask Paul to come up. He's got something for Alan, and then he'll take us out with the Serenity Prayer.
Alan, one of the sponsors for Recovery Capital here and for this event, for you coming, is Sauna Lake. And in Sauna Lake, we have people or members for life, and you got to see some of those people and celebrating those anniversaries. But for us, it's people who have come into our care. They are members for life. And for everyone who has come into our care and is helping bring care into our community here, we want to give you this coin of a member for life of Sauna Lake. To show that you are a real member for life.
Look at that.
All righty, there you go.
Best is yet to be.
And now-
How about that?
Member for life.
Oh, that's